I bet you have a memory, maybe from when you were a kid, of some plastic thing you loved. For me, it was this completely over-the-top sparkly princess toothbrush. Purple, teal swirls, the works. And here's a really wild thought. Like, most plastic ever made, that toothbrush is probably still out there, somewhere. Maybe in a landfill. Maybe. I don't know. Floating in the ocean. But look, this isn't just about the trash we can see, you know? Just this past Friday, those big UN talks, the ones trying to hammer out a global plastic treaty, well, they hit a major snag. Basically, they broke down. And that's a huge deal because plastic, it's not just environmental pollution we see everywhere. It's also a really significant contributor to climate change, something we don't always connect. Okay, so let's unpack this for you. We're going to dive deep into, well, why did these talks fall apart? And maybe more importantly, how can we actually tackle the emissions from plastic? Because they're just going up and up. Our mission here is pretty simple. Get you the core issues, maybe some surprising facts behind this whole global challenge. So you're not just, like, informed, but really understand what's going on. Right, let's kick off with just the scale of this plastic problem. Because honestly, it's kind of bonkers. Do you even know how fast we're making this stuff?
Oh, it's exponential. I mean, plastic production, it's been climbing. Yeah. At an average rate of 9% every single year since 1950. By 2019, we were churning out, get this, 460 million metric tons a year. It's astounding.
460 million tons. Wow. And what happens to it all? The disposal side must be terrifying too, right?
Absolutely. Think about this number. An estimated 52 million metric tons of plastic. It gets dumped straight into nature or just burned every year. And here's the stat that really, well, just stops you in your tracks. Yeah. Less than 10% of all the plastic I've ever produced has actually been recycled.
Less than 10%. Seriously. Okay, so that means like 90% plus of every bit of plastic ever made, your old toothbrush, that water bottle from yesterday, it's all still out there piling up.
Yeah, precisely. That's the core of it. It doesn't biodegrade, not on human timescales anyway, not like an apple core or something. So it creates this compounding problem. It just adds up. Yeah. An already massive pile of waste that doesn't go away. We're essentially building this huge global plastic debt. And guess who pays? Future generations. It's like a credit card bill that just keeps getting bigger, and we're not really paying it down.
Okay. Let's switch gears a bit, because I think what we're about to get into is maybe the most surprising part of this whole plastic story for a lot of people. We all picture, the landfills, the plastic bags and trees, the ocean gyres. But the really critical connection, the one most people miss, it's plastic's deep link to climate change.
That's exactly right. And here's the bombshell insight, if you like. We tend to obsess over recycling, over the waste part, right? But the vast majority of plastic's climate impact, it happens way before it even becomes waste. It's in the making of it. And that distinction, it's crucial. It lifts this whole thing beyond just managing trash. It makes it about climate action. It has to.
And when you say making it, you're talking fossil fuels. Yeah, that's the direct link.
Exactly. Plastic production. It eats up a huge chunk of our global oil and natural gas. Let me give you the figures. It's about 12% of global oil demand and over 8% of natural gas demand. And these aren't just like side things. They're the main ingredients, the raw materials plastic is built from.
So what does that mean in terms of carbon footprint, like actual emissions? Where does plastic production fit into the whole climate change picture?
It's pretty staggering. Just in 2019, making plastic was responsible for about 2.24 million metric tons of CO2 emissions. That's roughly 5% of all global emissions from plastic alone.
5%. Wow.
Yeah. And here's the really alarming bit. Projections. They show that could double. It could swell from around 2 million metric tons down to maybe 4 million metric tons by 2060 if we just carry on like this.
Yeah. Double. That's a massive increase. And if we connect that to the bigger picture, it sounds like this growing demand for plastic using fossil fuels to make it, it creates this really powerful economic reason not to change, doesn't it? Like a carbon lock-in. What does that mean exactly?
Well, yeah, it basically gets in the way of decarbonizing everything else. Think about it. Even if other industries try to move away from fossil fuels, plastic production offers this new, growing, really profitable market for fossil fuels. So it creates this powerful economic reason for fossil fuel producers not to fully decarbonize. And that helps explain why getting everyone to agree on real solutions for plastic is just so incredibly tough, contentious.
Okay, so given this growing problem, the UN did try to step in, didn't they? Back in March 2022, I think, the UN Environment Assembly kicked off talks for a proper treaty, legally binding, international. And it sounds like it was meant to be really ambitious. The idea was to move beyond just, patching things up here and there. And crucially, beyond just dealing with plastic waste after it's made, like collection and recycling, they were actually pushing for limits on how much plastic gets produced in the first place, even talking about banning single-use stuff.
Exactly. And that's where this phrase, the full life cycle of plastic, became so important and, well, so fought over. Now, for those of you following the talks, you'll know that term means looking at plastic's impact right from the start.
Right.
Like when the oil or gas is pulled out of the ground.
Right.
Through making it, using it, and then eventually disposal, the whole journey.
But that phrase, full life cycle, it became a real battleground, didn't it? Sounds like it exposed this fundamental split. Like, where should we even focus?
It absolutely did. It boils down to this basic disagreement. Do we intervene upstream, control production at the source? Or do we mainly stick to downstream stuff, managing the waste once it's already out there?
Right. But then, after all those months of talks, everyone hoping for a breakthrough, it just stalled. You can imagine the scene, right? Delegates packing up, no deal, silence. The treaty just left hanging.
Yeah.
So who was pushing back? Who were the main opponents to these bigger ideas like production limits?
Well, the opposition was pretty clear. You had petroleum-producing countries, specifically Saudi Arabia and Kuwait were mentioned a lot. They strongly argued that production limits were, quote, outside the scope of talks.
Right.
Basically, we shouldn't even be discussing this. And the United States also played a part in slowing things down. They proposed removing the treaty article that specifically mentioned the full life cycle of plastic.
It's the very thing we were just talking about, the thing that points towards production.
Exactly.
So for these countries, what's the vested interest? Why push back so hard against limiting how much plastic gets made?
Well, for these economies, plastic isn't just some random product. It's a huge financial stream, a lifeline almost. Remember, oil, natural gas, coal, they're not just burned for energy to make plastic. They are the plastic fundamentally, the raw materials, the feedstocks. So every new plastic bottle, every new toy, that means more oil sold, more gas sold, more revenue. So you start talking about cutting plastic production, well, that feels like a direct hit to their national income, their bottom line. And what's really fascinating here, I think, is how plastic pollution has sort of blown up into this new front line, a really significant battleground in the much bigger global fight over fossil fuels and climate change. It really reflects these deep global power dynamics, these economic dependencies, the failure to get a deal, a kind of a perfect miniature version, a microcosm of the huge challenges we face in global environmental agreements generally.
Okay, so given those terrible recycling rates, we talked about less than 10%, and the fact that these UN talks basically collapsed over trying to limit production, really makes you wonder, why do we put so much focus, effort, marketing, everything on recycling? Is it the real solution, or is it maybe something else?
That's a really sharp question. And yeah, it gets right to the heart of what people often call greenwashing. Because like we said, most of the emissions, the climate damage, it comes from making the plastic, not throwing it away.
Right.
So just dealing with plastic at the end of its life, it's just not going to be enough to tackle the climate side of things. I mean, even if we magically recycled 100%, you'd still have all those emissions from making it in the first place. And this intense focus on recycling, even though it doesn't achieve that much volume-wise, well, it can kind of serve to shift the responsibility, can't it? From the companies making the stuff onto us, the consumers. It lets industries keep pumping out huge amounts of virgin plastic that's brand new plastic while still looking like they're being environmentally responsible. Look, we support recycling.
Okay. So if recycling isn't the silver bullet we sometimes think it is, what does a real holistic solution actually look like? What are the other strategies, the ones that were maybe on the table or that we need to pursue now?
Well, the really impactful strategies fall into a couple of camps, I'd say. First, finding new ways to actually make plastic, using different ingredients, maybe different fuels, trying to get the oil and gas out of the equation. So that could mean things like bio-based plastics, perhaps, or using renewable energy to power the production plants.
Right, changing how we make it, but also just making less of it, addressing the quantity.
Exactly. That's the other crucial piece. We just need to be smarter, much smarter about the sheer volume of plastic we're churning out. And there were concrete ideas discussed at the UN, things like a ban on single-use plastics.
Yeah.
That's a clear example of how you could achieve that kind of volume control, essential volume control, really.
Now, the sources did offer a little bit of maybe cautious optimism. They said the plastic treaty isn't totally dead, just on hold, and officials seem keen to try and revive the talks.
Yes. But I think the key takeaway is this. For any treaty to be truly effective, it can't just be a waste management treaty. That won't cut it. It has to fundamentally be a production control treaty, one that genuinely tackles that full life cycle we talked about. And whether it succeeds, Well, that's going to depend entirely on navigating and ultimately overcoming those really powerful economic and geopolitical interests, the same ones that caused the breakdown in the first place.
So you know now that your childhood toothbrush, it's almost definitely still out there somewhere, part of that global plastic debt. But knowing what we've discussed today, especially that most of the climate damage comes from making plastic, not throwing it away, it raises a really important question for you, doesn't it? How does that shift your perspective on tackling this problem? And what role do you think innovation maybe, or perhaps really bold new regulations, what role should they play in just reducing the sheer amount of new plastic we create? Something to think about.